We're going to have a little transition now. We have this fantastic panel of alumni, so I'm going to invite them up, and they're going to kick it off by briefly introducing themselves, telling you a little bit about what they were doing before Fletcher, what they focused on while they were students here, and what they're up to now. And we'll go through their introductions and then really open it up to you to any questions that you might have. So I think we will, Chris, if you're ready to roll.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Chris Head. I was a Fletcher 2011, so graduated a little over 5 years ago. Originally from Austin, Texas. I went to, so a little bit about my background and kind of where I got to where I'm at now. So I was a biology undergraduate major at the University of Texas. And for about a year or so, I did kind of hard sciences, lab coat, and everything. But I'd studied abroad in undergrad, and I realized that I liked the international affairs. I liked kind of these complex problems and multidisciplinary, this and that. But I didn't really know what that meant or like what I could do with it. And so I moved to Panama and worked for like a small nonprofit in public health space. And from there I started looking at graduate programs and what kind of stuff or what kind of programs worked with kind of these issues and these challenges. And so learned about the Fletcher School, learned about some of the other schools, and so decided to come to Fletcher, where I wanted to study kind of say sustainable development is what they used to say back in the day. So kind of stuff focused on the environment, but also on business and policy, and kind of this confluence of different topics. And at the time, like climate change was becoming a bit more of a challenge. So I started here in 2009 and took an environmental resource and policy class, which kind of covered a broad variety of topics, including energy, forestry, agriculture, kind of all these topics that work together, and kind of realized that I wanted to focus on energy and clean energy and kind of the business and policy surrounding that. And so I focused most of the rest of my classes on that for the next 2 years, and worked for the Tufts Energy Conference for a couple years, which was really great. Took a class at MIT, took a couple at Kennedy School. And after graduating, moved to San Francisco and worked for like a clean energy company doing business development work for about 1.5 years. And then moved to DC and did some consulting for a little bit for utilities and strategy consulting, mostly clean energy stuff. And then joined the World Bank Group about 3 years ago. And I worked at IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, for a couple of years, and then moved to, we call the Climate Investment Funds, which is based in the World Bank, starting last year. And Climate Investment Funds, it's an $8 billion fund that aims to deploy capital through development banks to help accelerate low carbon markets. So about 2/3 of what we do is renewable energy and energy efficiency. And the other third is forestry, agribusiness, stuff like that. And we work in 72 developing countries. And so my role, I'd say, is very much like, there's no typical Fletcher role, but it's a pretty Fletcher role in that there's a mix of a lot of different things. It's very cross-sectoral. There's a lot of business, there's policy, there's strategy, there's economics, there's finance, like all this stuff is something we deal with kind of week in and week out. And so that's just kind of a general overview. Happy to answer any questions later. Thanks.
Katrina.
Hello, and congratulations. My name is Katrina Stanislaw Carr. I graduated in January 2013, so I was January graduation. My background prior to Fletcher, I was born and raised between France and the US, and I did my undergraduate degree at St. Andrews in Scotland, doing international relations. After St. Andrews, I moved to New York and started working in corporate law and realized pretty quickly that that was not the ideal field for me. So that was 2008, and I was lucky enough to get a job on the 2008 Obama campaign. So that was a total shift and a wonderful and very empowering one, and really getting involved in issues I cared about. Following that election, I then went to work for several environmental nonprofits, and so really got focused on the sustainability space and environmental issues. And came to Fletcher very much with the idea of focusing on environment, which I did, and it was fantastic. But I also discovered the field of negotiations, which hadn't really been on my radar and is something that Fletcher is fantastic in. And that really, for me, opened up this idea of using a skill set that I think I had somewhat naturally of working with people and coming to consensus, but really turned that into a marketable and hard skill set. And then through that process, I ended up writing my thesis here on sustainability in the global cacao sector, so looking at chocolate and thinking about how do you engage people on environmental issues that can seem overwhelming and distant through something as basic as chocolate. And for me, brought together this interest in sustainability, of working with people, and a love for food, and really got me focused on working on sustainability in the food sector. So after graduation, I went to work for a group in Boston called Ceres, and they work with Fortune 500 companies and investors on incorporating environmental and social issues into their operations. And I was there for a few years, and it was a very interesting learning experience, and then sort of felt like I wanted to do something that was a little more tangible and on the ground that really connected these issues. And at that point in time, there was an effort underway in Boston to open what is now open called the Boston Public Market. And it is a European-style food market bringing together all local small business producers, funded by the government and different investors, with the idea of how do you actually rebuild a functioning, sustainable local food economy. And it was a fantastically interesting, fun experience working with major investors, working with small producers, trying to get the larger community involved, working with different international public markets on how they've made it work and how you can build that culture. And I was helped get that off the ground and up and running. And then about 8 months ago, that was very much up and running. And so I transitioned and started my own consulting firm. So I'm now working independently, but on several different projects, focused again on food and sustainability, and working with smaller private enterprises, figuring out what that means in terms of their business and how you get away from these fun-sounding issues and what does it actually mean in practice. So I'm involved with a couple of startups primarily through that. So it's very interesting. I think the food sustainability space is a evolving one, and what's been really cool for me is how many Fletcher alum are actually in that space. And so I work very closely in one startup with a Fletcher alum who I met through the Alumni Network. There are several others who have been mentors to me, none of whom I knew while I was at Fletcher, but have come into my life in a really wonderful way. So it's really continues to integrate Fletcher in my life in a way that's very powerful.
Hello. Okay, Suzanne. Well, first want to start off by congratulating everyone and welcome to Fletcher. My name is Qasim Asnan, and I'm originally from Pakistan. Currently, I'm working at Strategy End. It's formerly Booz & Company, and I don't know why did they decide to change the name, but it's called Strategy End now. And my focus area, I focus in the consumer and retail sector. And primarily, I focus in helping consumer and retail companies figuring their digital retail strategy out. So basically helping them with their social media strategy, or basically looking in the next 10 years and how they could use digital to basically leverage the company and grow their top line revenue. So that's what I do currently. But before I go more into that, I just want to talk about my journey to Fletcher. So originally I'm from Pakistan, and I grew up in Pakistan. I spent my first 24 years back home. I majored in finance. I did my undergrad there. And then I got a job at Procter & Gamble. It's a company which sells shampoos, diapers, lots of other stuff. And so my experience there was very interesting because I was basically a part of this practice which they developed, which is a new practice, and it was called international trade practice. And what I was doing there was that I was looking at international trade policy and how the trade policy internationally impacts a big multinational like Procter & Gamble, which has to move a lot of stuff between different countries. So they have a lot of different manufacturing plants across the world, and how a China trade policy or a US trade policy impacts if they move stuff across the world. And that was very interesting because I got to interact with a lot of local government officials, a lot of W2 members, a lot of foreign dignitaries, etc. And I think that was basically, I spent 2 to 3 years over there, and I think that was my sort of an appreciation of the policy work. And I think after spending 2 to 3 years over there, I was at this inflection point where I wanted to decide if I to go for graduate school, and I had a couple of options. Number one, that I could either go for an MBA or either go for a policy school. I mean, typically, if you meet a lot of MBA students, they come from a typical private sector background. But at that time, my experience at the trade as a trade policy analyst, made me look into different sort of schools that I could, and that brought me to sort of policy schools. And so when I started to look at policy schools, I had different options, at Fletcher, Harvard, SIPA, Woodrow Wilson, etc. And I think as I started speaking and started speaking to different students, to different alums, there were three, I would say, key things that stood out for Fletcher for me. I think one, and I'll go in detail, but the first one is what the dean spoke about as well: the power of our alumni network. The second, access, and the third, diversity. So starting with the first one, I think the power of the alumni network, and a couple of years ago, I was sitting exactly where you guys are. I sort of really didn't understand what the power is. But now I think being over here, I think that's something where you have to trust, us and the bigger alumni network. It's not something that you'll come to the Fletcher School and, maybe in November you'll call someone, hey, get me a job. I mean, it doesn't work like that. But I think what happens is that, and as compared with my other friends who are at different schools, what I felt as a student over here is that the alumni really go out of their way to help you and really give you good advice. And I think that really makes a big difference when you are looking for jobs. Putting you to right contact, they might not be able to get you a job directly, but their contacts can really help you out. I think second is the access. I think the class size, as the dean spoke about, really matters. At Fletcher, we saw the statistics. There are around 250 people, I think, the class size on average. And I think that really makes a big difference in having a smaller cohort and also getting a better access to your professors. As compared, if you look at to SEPA or HKS, their size is approximately 600, if I'm not wrong. And that really changes the time that you spend, not with your fellow students, but also with the dean, with your professors, and engaging in smaller projects. I think the third, and I think that's personally was really important for me, was the diverse class. I think the diversity at Fletcher that you get, I don't think you can get it anywhere else. You have students from across the world. I think the friends that I've made from different parts of the world at Fletcher, not that, it helped increasing my experience as a person at Fletcher, but it was just the way I made friends. I think it was a very enriching experience for me at Fletcher. So I think these were the three coherent themes that I really felt while speaking to different alum and different students at Fletcher, and I think that was basically, the main reason that I sort of came to Fletcher. I think once at Fletcher, I think there are a couple of things that I think were really important for me. I think Fletcher, so I basically came to Fletcher with this idea of doing trade policy, and guess what? I actually did not end up doing that at all. And I think that's the pure strength of Fletcher, because it offers you so much. And I think that's what I would, recommend everyone to think about before. Like, it's good to come up with a definite sort of plan, but also come in and sort of explore different avenues and different opportunities, different courses, and then make a decision. So I ended up focusing on international economics. As Dean mentioned, Professor Klein, I worked very closely with him. And I ended up doing a joint thesis with a professor at Harvard, Ricardo Hausman, who's a Venezuelan professor, and Professor Larry Cohen at Fletcher on the macroeconomics growth diagnostic of Ethiopia, which is very different than what I had intended. But I think the opportunities at Fletcher and its association with different universities really sort of allowed me to do that. And I think apart from that, Fletcher also offers very real-time, really good courses. And I think one course that I would definitely want to recommend is the Professor Rusty Turner's course on consulting. It's like a real-life consulting course. And what it does is that you basically are paired with the real company and you go and work for them. So basically, I think my experience, I worked with MasterCard, and I spent 2 weeks in Mexico working for MasterCard, completely paid. Apart from the fact that it was an amazing, fun experience with 5 of my really good friends, it was also a great learning experience. We were doing field research in Mexico. We were traveling all around Mexico, and then we had to basically present a report to the MasterCard office. So yeah, and I think those are the few things that, and I think the final thing that I would want to close on is that I think coming to Fletcher, I think the most important thing would be to just come up with an open mind and let yourself sort of breeze through it and try to take different courses and meet as many new people as you can while in the process. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Shin, and I graduated here at 2012. First of all, congratulations for being admitted to the Fletcher School. And I have to say, I'm a little bit envious that you're entering at this time because you're going to be assessing just this geopolitical shift that's happening, not from just the U.S. administration, but also how other countries are responding to that. Responding to this geopolitical shift. And that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I currently work at a political risk consulting firm called Eurasia Group. And never has there been a time where CEOs are actually worried about, how their companies are going to do, internationally. I work with corporate clients who have offices all over the world, and we have people, business leaders in Nigeria wanting to know how the U.S. administration or how U.S. foreign policy is going to impact the way they do business transactions in country. So it's certainly an interesting time to be in this kind of, be studying this and eventually being hopefully leaders in whatever industry that you go into and thereafter. But I'm happy to talk more about that, about political risk in the Q&A or after the panel, but I think I want to focus on how I got here. Two things that I got out of my Fletcher experience was one, stepping out of my comfort zone, just kind of doing things that I wouldn't normally be comfortable with, or expanding my interpersonal skills, whether it's through the courses I took and some of the projects that I worked on, or even just interactions with some of my colleagues. And then two was finding a career fit that was, for me, which kind of ties into the first one, of stepping out of my comfort zone. So prior to Fletcher, I worked in a lot of think tanks in DC, being a research assistant to policy experts, primarily in the national security and foreign policy fields, and I thought it was the most interesting thing ever, how policy-making process works in Washington. So that was my first exposure to international affairs, and I wanted to see if, where, I wanted to go, get my master's and see where that would take me. To be completely honest, when I came to Fletcher, I was very intimidated by my colleagues. You had people who had years of experience or years on the field and the ground, working in Africa or working all over the world, and I just came, writing research papers in Washington. But as the admissions, as the admissions team here always says, there's no admissions mistake. So I felt like, all right, I need to figure out what I need to do, what I want to do. So again, my first year was, doing research and analysis. And after the first year, I looked down at my resume and I was like, gosh, my resume is very one-dimensional. I need to learn, kind of expand beyond like doing research courses, take more courses that are focused on projects where I'm working with a team, building something from scratch. And similar to what he mentioned, the second year, I kind of immersed myself into that. I realized that maybe research is not something I want to do. It's not a really good fit for me. So I took the consulting course, and I chose a project that was focused on doing business in North Korea. And it was, because my background was in Pacific Asia and international security, I did a lot of the research papers I wrote focused on regional security on the Korean Peninsula. So this was kind of a perfect fit for me because they needed somebody to assess the politics of North Korea and the feasibility of doing business. And I thought that was so interesting. I was like, I didn't know I can actually use my expertise to inform clients on doing business somewhere. And from there on, I started looking at careers in political risk. I didn't even know where to start. It's still a very niche industry that's growing. And that's how I kind of, what I also really enjoyed about that was just working with the client, developing a project. So it wasn't just about the subject matter expertise, but it was also kind of the day-to-day communication with clients, putting together a deliverable and then delivering it and getting feedback. So that process, I realized, is something that I kind of want to do as a career, and so I started looking more into the political risk industry. So after Fletcher, I was very fortunate to get a job at Control Risks. And then over time, I worked as an analyst there, and again, I wanted to expand beyond research. So I saw a role in the client services team at Eurasia Group. So I've been there after 2 years at Control Risks. I moved over to Eurasia Group in New York, and again, it's such a great time exciting time to be in this industry. But that's, I guess, two of the takeaways I would say is just kind of, as you mentioned, just come with an open mind and explore courses that you would never take because you'll be pleasantly surprised. And also make sure that you find something, whether it's courses or whatever program that you choose in the end, that it's a good fit for you. And it certainly was for me. So congratulations again.
Hi everyone, my name is Sebastian Molano. I graduated also in 2012. And the first thing I want to say to all of you is welcome. Even if you decide or not decide to come to Fletcher, it speaks highly that you're sitting here. It is a privilege to be sitting at the Fletcher School. And I love this opportunity because I hear the stories of many of my colleagues that I've known for many years, but just hearing their journey it's fascinating. And I think that that's what makes this school special, is that we'll come together and we have very different journeys and paths and things that make us passionate. And that's what makes Fletcher remarkable. In my case, I'm from Colombia. I did my undergraduate studies in Colombia. And very, very similar to you, I started in, finance and international relations, investment banking, and I hate every single day, those 6 months. I hated them totally, it's double Windsor, shaved. It wasn't my cup of tea. I was 23, I had no idea what I really wanted. And I think that when I came to Fletcher, I was still struggling with it. And I'm still struggling with this, but you grow more comfortable with that. But at that point, I was trying to find my way in which what I really wanted to do and what I was passionate about. And I've always been interested in power dynamics, power relations, and how that manifests in different ways. And I had the chance to go and work for a small NGO in the Haitian-Dominican border. So I quit my investment banking job, shipped to the Caribbean for 4.5 years. And the fascinating thing of it is that people from NGOs at that level are afraid of numbers. So they were like, oh, we need to do a budget. And I'm like, I know. So it's those kind of things that come in handy that you don't think they're going to come in handy. And I spent 4.5 years learning about development, but it was more one-sided, right? It was me going to rural areas in the Dominican Republic and Haiti and working with farmers and understanding their issues, but learning a lot from them. And then slowly start to give back. And in the midst of this, the earthquake happened, and I was thrown into a humanitarian response for about 9 months. And this is around the time, it's 2010, so I'm like trying to figure out, am I gonna go to grad school? What's gonna happen? I'm in Haiti. Very difficult times, and similarly to where you are, right? It's like you're making a decision to come to the school, to go to other schools. It's a financial commitment, right? So you also think about like, am I gonna be able to do what I want to do afterwards? And that's a real concern that I think should be taken into consideration. For me, it was unthinkable to come and do grad school in the US, unthinkable. I mean, my mom was the first one to go to college of her family. I'm the first one to go and get a master's degree. I put my application, and then the Fletcher School was generous enough that I could afford to come and study here. And I think it's a privilege, and I think that many of us are into these levels of pursuing higher education because we're concerned about the inequality in the world, right? That you can see it in the private sector, public sector, but it's the inequality that drives people to don't have access to opportunities. So I saw that as one of the aspects that we all had coming into Fletcher. And at Fletcher, I was very, I was thinking, I'm gonna get skills because I was in a humanitarian response and I had no idea how to be efficient on that. I was just thrown into that. So I felt that if I wanna keep doing development work, I needed to understand better because if I was gonna be there, I needed to have a solid base to make decisions. But also it became a place for self-reflection, and that's counterintuitive, right? You come to grad school because you want skills, but then you come here to reflect on the things that made you get here, right? What's unique about you for choosing working with refugees and not in businesses, or why you choose to work in, cybersecurity and not in water and sanitation. So it's a lot of self-reflection, and in that way you start identifying what are the things that matter to you, and then you start matching it with the skills. And Fletcher is really good at that because it gives you flexibility. So I came with an idea of focusing more on kind of big aspects of development. So a little bit of gender, microfinance, but then throughout my 2 years of experience at Fletcher, I end up focusing on NGO management and leadership and power, but I discovered gender issues, and that was kind of like a passion with Professor Diane Matsurana. And my professional career shifted after I came to Fletcher. After that, I spent 3 years working for the Organization of American States on the intersection of gender, women's political participation, and elections. And that was more of a high level, working at a headquarter level instead of the ground operations that I was before, and the challenges that come with that. Right? If you prefer to work at a level in which you end up doing different things and every day is different, or you're at a HQ level in which systems and you think about policies and you think about recommendations. And in that journey, I start seeing those connections between gender and masculinity, and I start getting more interested about it. And in that journey, I encountered so many of my Fletcher friends from those 2 years who were willing to bounce ideas with me to get those things forward. And in the last 2 years and a half, I've launched an initiative called Define Gender Roles that is looking to spark a conversation on gender roles and gender norms and how gender shape your life, and not like different silos, but how our experience of life is shaped by gender. And thanks to that work, I got to where I am now, which is I work as a gender advisor for Oxfam America here in Boston. And that was kind of the dream job I want when I came to Fletcher, but I have to do all those other things before I got there. And I think that for many Fletcher friends and Fletcher people I know, it has been the same way. It's not a stress shot, but keep going different places. But at the end of the day, that's what it makes you unique, and that's what all of this effort of coming 2 years, not working, getting into debt, being away from families, being challenged matters. So I hope we can have a rich conversation, and we can answer the questions you have to give you more elements to make your decision-making process better. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I remember when you were all on that side. So nice to hear what you're up to. Okay, questions. Also, we have Liz Wagner here, who planned the entire open house. Thank you very much, Liz. Dan Birdsall in the back. I know many of you have been emailing with them. They have microphones, and they will run up and down the aisles for your questions. So who wants to go first? Don't be shy.
All right. My question is there anything that you regret not having done or done during your time to make it more worthwhile?
That's a great question. Go ahead.
I think it's a very good question. If anything, I think we all talked about being open-minded and changing tracks when you were here, and I think it took me a little bit longer than in retrospect it might have, to be okay with that, and coming in thinking, okay, here's exactly what I'm going to get out of it, and I have these 2 years, and boom, 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 and then being really open to exploring, and that was when things sort of getting a little bit less obsessed with all the reading you have to do and all the assignments and the impressive people, and really taking it in and being a bit self-reflective as well. And I think that was the element of my experience that really, when things really started to shift a little bit, and knowing that that's actually kind of what you go for, is to allow for that space.
I think I would say like missing out on a Fletcher House concert because I had an exam next morning. So I think that's my biggest.
Yes. Oh,
I'm gonna go here and then
Yeah,
down to
yeah.
you.
Hi, thank you for sharing your experiences. And maybe like a lot of people in the room can are thinking the same thing. I am a very curious person, and I'm sure that a lot of you are as well. So how do you balance being open-minded, but at the same time kind of like staying focused and getting the professional skills that you want out of your graduate school education?
Okay, let me touch on that a bit, because I had a very similar challenge coming in. And I think there's a couple things that Fletcher does really well with that. So first off, it's a very broad curriculum, and the availability of classes and resources is you can take a little bit of everything. So like my first semester, I took law, environmental policy, I took like an Islam in the West class, stats. So a pretty broad variety of things that I could then kind of figure out which angle that was kind of best for me. And then later with the classes, kind of focus more on like the tangible kind of skills. I think it's really important going in that one, like coming out with a skill set, a technical skill set, is generally a good thing. But trying to kind of find, what field or what kind of specific sector you want to work in is also really important. And so, yeah, balancing those is tricky. But I know with some other programs, like it's a lot more kind of regimented first semester or two, which on the plus side gives everyone that goes to that program a pretty good, solid, maybe quantitative skill set. But one of the challenges of that is that it's a little harder to kind of learn new things or learn new kind of areas you may want to work in. So, yeah.
So I would say being intentional. I think that's very important because you're going to get pulled into different directions, right? So to give you a specific example, I mean, we all have great ideas. That's why we're here, right? In different fields. But the amount of information that we have currently, it's just impossible to manage. So what you have to be good at is how do you convey a message that is effective and that gets to the people that need it. So communication skills, that's something you're going to use regardless in which sector you work. So if you know that that's something you're interested in building while you're at Fletcher, don't get yourself pulled into econometrics. Don't do it. Seriously, you're going to feel the pressure when it's like, oh, you're not taking. I'm like, should I be taking it? Is this something I should be doing? And it's like, well, no, I mean, I'm really happy that there are 30 other people that are very capable taking that class because the world needs econometrics. Awesome. But not me, I don't. So it's difficult, but when you're intentional, then you start doing those kind of, taking those steps. For me, one of the things that I did that I'm really happy in that regard is that I was working a lot on communicational skills and how to be more, how to be better in expressing my ideas. And I ended up taking a class, a J-term class at the Harvard Kennedy School. It's called Persuasion, the Arts of Communication. And it was, it's in January, everybody's on vacations, 2 weeks intensively from 8 to 5. But you say, this is something that I see it's going to play out in my life because you can have the best ideas, but if you don't know how to pitch them, sorry. So the intentionality of things will help you to kind of navigate that pressure and that, your friends trying to push you and go in different directions and tell you what you need. But when you're intentional, I think that helps a lot.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I'm very curious to know how you guys managed to balance different areas of your life while at Tufts in terms of if you guys were doing some work study or if you guys were doing a research project. I know you mentioned you were working on your thesis. How many things were you guys balancing that were part of this getting your graduate degree experience, and how did you manage it?
So I remember when I was at Fletcher, a colleague who was a class ahead of me said something to me one day in a class about someone had said to her, a therapist or someone, you should think of your life as a pie chart, and you have family and work and studies and friends and whatever sport you're into. But if your life is a pie chart, you can't be 100% at anything. And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I mean, that's fine. But I thought it was kind of a crummy analogy, and I thought, well, I guess, but and I sort of thought about it and dismissed it and went to bed, and the next morning woke up and I was having breakfast, and I thought, oh, those all go on one pie chart, because in my head there was the work pie chart and the studies pie chart and the family, and I was like, now I'm really seeing it. I was like, that's probably a little bit of why I'm so stressed out right now. And it is a lot. And that's my point, is it's a lot. And I certainly, and I'm sure all of us do all the time, you feel that you should be perfect in all these elements. And I think it shifts. Like there are periods at Fletcher, I worked my whole time that I was studying here, and you have studies, and a lot of people are in that similar situation, and you have family and friends. And there are times where you have more time to allocate to one thing versus the other. And there are certainly times, someone asked a question about regret, where you do have to just say, I'm not going to necessarily read everything that's assigned and do it perfectly. And there is this chance to go be with people that part of the experience is being with the people, and I'm going to make that choice and go do those things. And so it's just, I don't think there's a right answer to it, but I think it's just, breathing a little bit and thinking it through and knowing that there are periods where you just are don't ever leave the library. But then when the next semester rolls around and it's beginning of the semester, then you do a lot of other things more. And it's also a very, I think, supportive community, and the professors are tremendously helpful. And there were certainly times where I went to professors and got advice on figuring things out and working with colleagues. So it's not a perfect answer, but it's more an answer of that's a part of any grad school experience, and this is a great place to have to figure those pieces out, I think.
I think in reality, there is a really good balance. I don't think that I did a good amount of studying. I did a good amount of, socializing and taking part in all the social activities in school. And also kind of going out to Boston and just exploring the city. So overall, when you're actually here as a student, everything kind of balanced itself out. And I did also do work study. For the first year was much easier. I think second year you're kind of more focused on kind of looking for a job, or you take. I think you take more of the kind of project-based courses like consulting that takes a lot of your time. But if you think about it, when you're actually here at school, everyone's kind of in it together. People are always in study groups together, or they're all doing projects together. Getting something done for a course, or doing like study groups or reading groups together. So in a way, like everything balances out, and at the same time, like everyone's kind of doing it at the same time with you. So I just never felt like I was missing out on anything. I kind of was able to allocate time to everything that I wanted to get out of the experience.
So in terms of specific parts of that experience, right? So one, the summer between the 2 years. That's kind of like a moment in which you want to, if you are shifting careers, that's an opportunity for you to explore that field. So that's very specific. And the semester before that, everybody's stressed out about trying to figure out the summer. And that's the reality of things. I think it was, I don't know if it was our first year or second year, where in one of the walls, people start posting the rejection letters. It happens to everybody, right? It's like, we'll get rejected, and that's okay. That would make us like, okay, I'm gonna keep going until I get it. So that's very specific. If you, for instance, know coming in that you wanted to do something specific, start early. Start reaching out to people, and don't wait till the two months before that. In my case, I took a lot of advantage of Fletcher resources, and I applied for a scholarship that would give you up to, how much was that? Like $2,000, $3,000 for working with an NGO. And I spent 9 weeks in Central America doing an evaluation for Catholic Relief Services. So that was funded, and that helped me to release the stress of money. The second one is, I don't think you have to write a thesis, right? You have a capstone project, is that correct?
Capstone, yep.
So I'll say, do a thesis. You're not gonna have, if you haven't done a thesis before, this is the moment to do it, right? You're gonna come out strong out of it. It's gonna take your time. It's gonna be difficult. I did that, and I really, really appreciate what I got out of it. I could tell people, this is what I wrote. And English not being my first language was like, this is a testament that I can perform. Although I have 2 Fletcher friends, native English speakers, reading it, and they gave me feedback, and it was amazing, right? Because it's a collaborative process. And the third one is, we had a soccer team, and we had so much fun with it. We practiced twice a week. We had a team. We played on the grad school soccer league. We got second place. And those were the moments in which you interact with people that you don't take classes with. Different languages, different passions. So it's kind of like you decide, like Katrina said, you got to decide sometimes, like, am I going to read these 2 readings, or am I going to go hang out with the guys play soccer? Yeah, so.
When you're not taking econometrics. We have lots of questions. Maybe Dan, you can come down this side. Okay.
Hi. First of all, thank you guys so much for sharing your experiences. I was wondering if you could talk, and I touched a little bit on it, about the strength of the alumni network in Boston and also outside of Boston.
Who's lived in the most places post-Fletcher? Chris,
So I lived in Los Angeles after Fletcher, and and now in New York. And I have to say, it's pretty strong. In LA, it's I think people are less focused on international, national. Their careers have taken, a different track, I think, after Fletcher. So they're less internationally focused, but there's still a strong network of people who, want to make sure that you're settled into any city, regardless of whether you've been there for a few years or not. I remember when I moved there, they were really curious to see how the school is, because everyone, thing is that you're going to meet people who've had different deans, and the school is in a different state. So they're always curious to know what the school is like now, or since you left. And I think within New York, because it is a bigger community, you're going to meet a lot more Fletcher alums. But I'd have to say the alumni network is quite strong, but I've only been in 2 cities. But I don't know, just in LA and New York, but I don't know if anyone has other experiences.
So I live in DC. I mean, I lived after Fletcher. I spent a year and a half in New York, and now I'm in DC. So I think DC, for obvious reasons, has the biggest network because you have the policy jobs there, you have the State Department, you have World Bank, IMF. So we have a big Fletcher alumni network over there, and every year we have the career trip down in DC, where we have like couple of big events. Whereas there's an alumni network event as well, and that's like annual event where everyone meets each other. In New York, we also have a very big sort of presence, and it's primarily, it's a lot of banking sector, private sector, consulting, and UN. So there are lots of folks in UN or are actually posted, from like different embassies and all there. And I think apart from this, I think the way I see it, it's just not about the cities. I think it's just the accessibility to them. We have Alumni Network. I think it's a website where you can basically get the email address for any alumni who's graduated in Fletcher, going back to, I think, 50s or probably even more. And it has emails of everyone. And believe me or not, like I have used that. Like I use that extensively, and I would just, when you're looking for jobs, I would just send one every day, like 3-4 emails to people who were in my sort of type of field. And I would definitely get a reply from like 60-70% of the times. And if you follow up with them, the others who don't reply, they would definitely get back as well. And I think that's real. That's the real power. And as I said earlier, when I speak to my other friends who went to different schools, they have very different experiences where the alums hardly reply to them. And that's where Fletcher has a big edge, definitely.
I'd love to add just a thing about that because it's been really, really powerful for me. And I think you touched on it well, it's sort of this informal alumni network, just in emailing someone, and people are so open. I now work very closely with an alum who is 10 years ahead of me, and she's connected me with all these other alum from different years, and there's just this constant openness and let's brainstorm and talk ideas and see what we could do together. That's just been really tremendous, and I've found that certainly in traveling different places. And I'd like to add 2 specific things. One is that the Office of Career Services really, they pride themselves in sticking with you after you graduate. And Helen Anderson there, who's wonderful, has become a friend and will constantly say, oh, have you met this person? And just because we're keeping in touch. And so I continue to uncover these new connections, not because I'm looking for a job, but because she thinks, hey, you guys should connect. And there's such a richness to that, but also the professors. And there have been several professors who remain very, very good friends of mine. One sat at my table at my wedding. I mean, it's like a godfather to me, and in the good way, the non-mafia way. And they are always, I think, so proud of their students and wanting to say, you should just meet this person because you'd like each other and you might have a lot to talk about. And so that's just yet another layer to how it continues to grow.
Touch on West Coast, on San Francisco for a second, if anyone's thinking about going out there, which many people are for good reason. There's more and more folks that go West Coast, I think, every year, both Seattle, San Francisco. They're involved in both like foundations, but also tech and businesses. And so I think that network is growing quite a bit.
Hello, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. And could you please tell us what kind of clubs, student clubs, you were part of?
I was in the Tufts Energy Conference for 2 years, and I was in the Fletcheros band for a couple years. And what else do we do? Cultural nights, maybe? There's a lot of things to do, like constantly, every single week. There's a lot to get involved in.
I was involved in Asia Club, but also like in terms of social events like cultural nights. They also, I think the dean mentioned that everything is student run, so everything from Diplomats Ball, Fletcheros, soccer games, or the Fletcher Running Club, they're all organized and run by students. They're also like, well, there used to be the Blakely Halloween party. There's a lot of events to be kind of partake in. Also, like creating the Where the Hell is Fletcher video. That one I did for our year. Follies. So I think we all like kind of participate in different things. But I think just in terms of like for the club, for the school itself, I was part of Asia Club, and I know you were involved in a few others.
So I was in the Latin American club and the Fletcher soccer team. But the cool part, for instance, of the Latin American club is that we're trying to bring people to speak about Latin America here, because Fletcher does not have a strong emphasis on Latin America, so we needed to highlight that and bring it. So you're like, if there's something you're missing here, then you can create it. So that's the cool part of it. You just bring people together and start asking for money for budget for the club, and just keep on going, and then it happens, right? That's the way it goes. But for instance, with the cultural nights, there used to be 4 cultural nights a year, and it sounds like, oh yeah, they're gonna get together and play Latin music, and it's like, no. These are like shows, and people are like dancing, and we're putting, dance moves together. And sometimes when you're in the middle of midterms and you have 1 hour of salsa, that'll do it, right? It's like just bring people together that don't know each other, again, because we talk a lot about the networks, but it's about that, those spaces in which you interact with people that you usually don't. Well, I had a funny story that happened to me working at the OAS in Washington. We had an electoral mission in Paraguay. And they invited me to a dinner with somebody from the U.S. Embassy in a restaurant in Asunción. Everybody's kind of like, we're going to talk to the U.S. Embassy, how things are going with the election, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I got there, the goalkeeper of our soccer team sitting on the table. And that was the guy who, when we were going to have the meeting, Patrick Elliott, right? And it was like, everybody's like, hi, nice to meet you. Like, hey, Patrick, how's it going? And my coworkers were like, oh, we went to Fletcher together. So it's just, and you're going to encounter more and more people like that, because we're kind of everywhere. But those spaces, those clubs allow you to have this kind of interaction. So it might not be sometimes very academic, or sometimes they're just like the space of the conference, but it allows that kind of type of interaction.
Hello, my name is Danielle. I'm from Ecuador. And I would like to know some pros and cons of being an international student here in Fletcher, or something you'll tell to an international student that I should know. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a very interesting question, and I think personally, I think it varies for everyone. But I think moving here, I think the few things, I think language I've seen is a major issue for a lot of people, and it really depends on your background. But I think Fletcher does a very great job at that. We have language tutors over here who really help you out in sort of helping you look at your papers or thesis or whatever help you need. I think that's one big thing. But I think initially when I was coming here, I was sort of scared about, I might be, but sort of the minority in amongst the class. But that's actually not true. When you come here, the class is so diverse, and you meet so many different people. Like if I think about my now good friends from Fletcher, I think it's a really good balance. Then I have a bunch of American friends, but I have a bunch of like European and Latin American friends, and a couple of Asian friends as well. And I think once you come here, I think the school is so welcoming, and to be honest, there's like you just don't feel anything in sort of being from an outsider or something. It's a very inclusive feeling, definitely.
I'm just going to add 2 things. One, weather. That's something that is challenging, because if you come from a warm country, then you're like miserable with the cold. So it's like prepare for that. Good winter gear. It's going to be cold anyways. So it's just like making sure that you have what you need. And the second one that was very weird and foreign for me was the networking. Right? It's that the hi, nice to meet you. My name is da-da-da. I'm coming to Fletcher School, and this is what I'm doing. And can I have your business card? And it's like, I was like, what? Too much. Right? But that's something that you start learning to be comfortable with, but also becomes natural. That is not forced, that you're not trying to, it's not transactional all the time. So I had a lot of cultural shock with that for the first year and a half. And then you start realizing that a lot of people do. So you start kind of like sharing advice of how do you deal with this? How do you make this happen? So it doesn't feel so transactional, because the networking is something that they're going to highlight everywhere. Right? It's like it's who you know, it's the resources that you tap into. So it might take some adjustment, but I think that this is a good space in which you see that other people are going through that too, and it's just uncomfortable.
Okay, that's a really important point. Like when you come to Fletcher, you'll have sessions with the career services where they'll talk about elevator pitch, and you'll have to prepare it. And yeah, I mean, coming from a different culture, I think you initially it's about sort of selling yourself in a way, sort of talking about what you have done in the past and sort of packaging it in a storyline. And I think it really depends on what culture you're from, because you're not used to that. You're not used to sort of come up a story about your life and sort of putting it out to get a job or anything. And I think it's just part of this of sort of the culture over here, and you have to just get used to it. And I think it just takes time, and you'll be pretty good at it. And then you'll realize you're actually good at that.
First of all, thank you so much for your time. For those of you who, I know there are at least a couple of you who speak more than one language, whether you took it in conjunction at Fletcher or came in with that linguistic capacity, how did being multilingual or bilingual, how did you integrate that with your Fletcher studies to enhance and enrichen them? And what did you find beneficial, I guess, of being able to, that you got out of knowing another language at Fletcher?
I'm French English bilingual. I didn't use my French a tremendous amount at Fletcher, but having that was, I think, just there were a lot of opportunities in French-speaking countries through Fletcher. So summer between my first and second year, I was in the south of France working at the World Bank, and there's a great Fletcher connection to the World Bank. And so I think my experience is wherever you would want to use that and apply it, there are a lot of very available resources in order to do that. So it was a bonus and a plus, and connected, I think, very easily.
So one of the elements that I thought it was helpful was that, let's say when we're in a class and we're reading most of the stuff in English, and then you have different languages, you can tap to literature and resources that other people can't. So that gives you a wealth of knowledge and different standpoints, right? Because when you're reading in English, you're reading more from the perspective of the world of those people. So having a different language also gives voices to those other elements of academia that need to be present in the conversations. So I found that exciting and helpful. And also to see where there are gaps. In my case, my first language is Spanish, so I would be like, oh, there's nobody writing on this. So this is a space for me to be able to write if I'm interested in pursuing that option. So it gives you that flexibility. And one of the things that I saw with several of my friends is that when they came to Fletcher, their Spanish was, When they left, they're just like fluently speaking in Spanish because they hang out with the people who speak in Spanish. We have a group of like 8, 10 people that were from different parts of Latin America. And we'll communicate in Spanish all the time. So, you have the French people that want to learn Spanish, the Asian people that want to learn Spanish, and then it becomes a matter of building different communication. And when English is not your first language, also kind of like changes the balances of power in that relationship, because it's like now they're trying to, right, talk to you in your language. So I think that in those two elements, one, the academic, but the other also like the interaction with your classmates, and how this is an opportunity for practicing. Many people had lunches, so it's like the Chinese, the Mandarin lunch, French. I had the chance to take Portuguese classes at the All-In Center here next door with Tufts students. And it was fun because it was going and hanging out with other people twice a week and just be distracted from things, but also focusing on a specific skill that I could use afterwards.
So we have lots of wine and cheese waiting for you. So we'll take 3 more questions, and then we'll get downstairs. So I'll leave that to Liz and Dan to figure out.
Okay. Hey, thank you for your insights. It's been super interesting. My question for you is, how have you talked about Fletcher to your prospective employers? What kind of narrative do you tell? What kind of story do you talk about? Especially for those in the private sector that might not know Fletcher's name. Like, what kind of ways do you talk about your story here?
Well, I think one, it's kind of unexpected when you do come across Fletcher folks in places where you might not. Like in my interview for IFC, just so happens, of course, there was someone from Fletcher in the room, and it's not really uncommon. For companies and folks maybe on the West Coast or somewhere else that may not know the brand, I think that just kind of the approach to problem solving and the variety and kind of depth of skill set that you can develop here, I think is going to be really valuable wherever you go. So a strong analytical skill set, kind of connecting the dots on a lot of different markets and sectors and law and economics and stuff like that. I think most employers are going to find very valuable. Communication skills, like all these little things that most, jobs, when you get out on a day-to-day, are what you're doing most of the time anyways. And I think that you can develop that skill set really strongly here and then pitch that and sell that. And I think that it's an intriguing, value proposition.
So I think that's a very relevant question, and I think being in consulting, I think at Booz, I'm probably one of the few. I think I know just a couple more people. One of them have left who are from Fletcher, but I think that's where, there are not a lot of people at Fletcher, but I think there's a lot of value that I think Fletcher brings, or that I know people who can bring, and I think I've heard that in the feedback as well. And just to give you a couple of examples. So when I joined Booz, they were basically looking for someone, urgently who had some payment sector experience, because they got a big project for with Apple, and basically I happened to work through the consulting project with MasterCard on the whole payment landscape, and Apple at that time was working on Apple Pay and sort of figuring out the whole, Apple Pay landscape, which networks to partner. And I think I was a big asset to that sort of project. And they initially, the partner, just called me. He's like, hey, I've heard you've worked on MasterCard. What did you do? And I told him. He's like, perfect. You can just start. And I think that was one of my probably the best project to date. To be honest, I was not a payment expert. I just worked for MasterCard through Fletcher for like 3 weeks. But I think what was important to them was someone at least knowing the landscape, and they could not find anyone within Booz who actually even understood a little bit about the sort of the payment landscape, because it's just a new area for them. I think the second example, it's also about sort of, when you are consulting, it's a lot about storyboarding or sort of writing a story. So you do a lot of data analysis, they're like big spreadsheets and, a lot of data, looking at them, spending days on them. But I think what I've heard, and we have other policy graduates as well. It's just not Fletcher. You have a few people from HKS or Woodrow Wilson, and I think the consistent feedback that we all sometimes discuss, that we all sort of get, is that eventually, as you move up in consulting, it's data analysis is important, but essentially it's about basically writing a better story to the client and basically understanding their problem, and then basically writing a story for them, which basically they can sell further. And I think the consistent feedback we've got is all the people who go to policy schools are clearly and considerably much better at that. And that's, I think, a big value that I think we bring to consulting firms.
All right, I think with that, we've got a lot of students. Do we want to do one more? All right, but we got a lot of people that are looking to meet you downstairs. So we'll do one final question.
I have the microphone, and I'm not giving it back till I ask my question, so good call. I was hoping that one or more of you could share an experience where you felt the most out of your depth after graduating Fletcher, probably in a professional setting where, despite everything you learned in 2 years at Fletcher, you still felt like you were starting from scratch and on your steepest learning curve. So it's kind of an open-ended question about, one of those experiences where you, despite everything you learned, you started flailing or feeling out of your depth, and you emerged on it, maybe not realizing it was happening at the time, but kind of developed a skill set along that learning curve.
I think for me is transitioning as an analyst to client servicing, business development, because that's not a skill set that I really explored at Fletcher. So, part of my job, 20% of my job is doing sales, but also doing account management and working closely with clients, and having to communicate that in the interview process was definitely a challenge for me. But I knew that I'd be really good at the job. I knew that, part of being at Fletcher was putting together a really good resume and really good application, and also learning just kind of the interview process. So I guess that would be kind of the biggest challenge for me post Fletcher, kind of transitioning from doing research to do more like business development, account management stuff.
So when I started my job at the Organization of American States, I was hired to be gender advisor and elections. And the person who managed political financing in the team left the week that I arrived. And we had an election in Nicaragua 2 weeks later. So my boss called me to her office and she's like, "You're gonna do that in the Nicaraguan election." And I'm like, "What? Political financing? I have no idea about political financing." She's like, "Well, there is a methodology, there's information, and you're gonna," I'm not asking if you wanna do it, it's just I'm telling you that you're gonna do that. So, after you start kind of like panicking and saying, "Oh my God, what am I gonna do now?" I think that for me, what Fletcher gave me at that point that I didn't have before was kind of like structure, right? To say, okay, there is a vast amount of knowledge that I have no idea about. So, do I know somebody who knows about this? Let's reach out to that people. What are the key pieces of information that I need to do the job that I'm supposed to be doing? So kind of like structuring your time, structuring the resources, and then going at it. It's like when you have a paper in a class and you just have to come to the other side with flaws, but in that process. And then once I was there, I had to go to the country and talk to people on the ground about that and ask them questions. So it's like the learning curve was really fast, but I think that Fletcher taught me how to, shake up and get going, because there is always something happening. And when after that happened, I came out of the experience and like, wow, I learned a lot in a month. But I guess that if I wouldn't have gone to grad school and if I wouldn't have had the classes and the kind of exposure at those things at Fletcher, my performance would have been very different. So it taught me that also that I could pick a topic and get going. I'm not going to be an expert, and I wouldn't pretend to be an expert, but I was supposed to do something and do it as good as I could. And I think that Fletcher gave me that confidence, but also the skills to say like, okay, don't panic. What are you going to do? Have the structure and get going.
Thank you all. That was amazing.